Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good to see you all again. Our Torah portion this week is Vaiyechi. Am I standing too close to it? Is that a problem? Everyone else is hearing that, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I'm working with it.
Okay. Well, in any event, thank you for all you do with that. I know it's hard working with a new sound system. Yeah. Anyway, so the Torah portion of Vaiyechi can be found in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28, through Genesis chapter 50, verse 26.
Chazak.
Yeah. Chazak. The Haft portion is in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, and the Brut portion is the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 1 through 19. So at the beginning of our Torah portion for this week, we find that Israel has lived in Egypt 17 years, bringing him to a ripe old age of 147. Which, funny thing is, in the previous chapter, or in the previous portion, he had told Pharaoh, few and evil have been the days of my life. 147 years. I'd say he hung in there pretty well. But at the same time, that brings to mind the idea that when you're separated from your beloved son for as many years as he was, yeah, it feels like few and full of strife, certainly. Anyway, so at 147, he knows that his time to die is drawing near. How he knows it doesn't say. It just says that he knows it. So he calls to Joseph, and he makes Joseph swear to bury him in the land of their fathers rather than in Egypt when he dies. Now, strangely, the next part sees Joseph getting word that his father is ill. And that got me wondering, well, why does he need to receive word of this? Why does he need a servant or a messenger to come and say, hey, your father's really sick, this is it? One would think that the good relationship that the two of them had and the fact that they were reunited would mean that they would be together all the time. Moreover, if Israel is dying, then you'd think that Joseph would be by his side constantly and wouldn't need someone else to tell him, hey, your father's passing away. The sages offer an interesting answer. The idea that Joseph kept his father at a distance on purpose. Why? Well, we see the same pattern in the previous passage. Upon revealing himself to his brothers, Joseph asks, is our father okay? Is our father well? Now, he's second in command of all of Egypt by this point, and he can't send a messenger to find out or to tell his father, hey, I'm alive and well, I'm in Egypt, things are going great, but he doesn't send a messenger. Moreover, it just strikes me as strange that he wouldn't send word of where he is and what he's doing. And when Joseph does see Jacob again, he's not alone with him. In Genesis 46:28, it says, he made his chariot ready. And when one travels by chariot, one does not travel alone, because the chariot indicates that he is a man of importance, and it would be foolish for him to travel without attendants and bodyguards. So he went to see him with an entourage. And his brothers, of course, were also there, so he wasn't alone with his father. And after hearing that his father is ill and dying, Joseph brings Ephraim and Manasseh with him, his sons, so he doesn't come alone to come and see him in his final moments. Just a very strange pattern. The sages say that he's protecting the peace of his family by doing this. Specifically, he's protecting his brothers. See, if Joseph were to have written to his father about his success when he became viceroy of Egypt, or if he, after they had been reunited, had been caught alone with him, Jacob surely would have taken a moment to ask him, so how is it exactly that you ended up in Egypt of all places? And Joseph would have had two choices then. On the one hand, he could lie to his father, or he could tell him that his brothers sold him into slavery. The story makes no indication that Jacob ever had any idea that Joseph had been sold into slavery by his own brothers. For all he knew, Joseph had, in fact, been attacked by a wild animal, but it survived, maybe survived his wounds or managed to get away, and then was found by strangers and then ended up in Egypt somehow. Maybe the Egyptians were the ones who found him wounded and they just sort of took him in. Jacob is blissfully unaware of the suffering his son has really gone through and who did it to him. He doesn't know about the pit. He doesn't know about Potiphar's wife. And as far as we know, he doesn't even know about the time that Joseph spent in prison. Any time that Joseph would have spent alone with Jacob would have risked the truth coming out. And if the truth came out about what Joseph's brothers did to him, Jacob's heart would be broken all over again. He might very well have cursed his sons for something like that. How dare you tell me he's dead? His years with his family, living in Goshen, have no doubt been the happiest of Joseph's life, and probably of Jacob's as well. So why ruin that by speaking of the sins they committed against him so long ago, sins that he's already forgiven? Joseph keeps Matthew 18:15, which says, "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over." His brothers repented of what they did. Now Joseph's method of pointing out what they had done may have been a bit surreptitious, but nonetheless, they admitted it, they repented of it, and they've shown that they've moved on and they've changed their ways. Therefore, their sin is a private matter. Similarly, 1 Peter 4:8 says, "Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins." Proverbs 10:12 says, "Hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers all wrongs." Like the Messiah, Joseph is covering his brother's sins from his father's eyes. He's not allowing his father to see what they have done because they have repented of it. As Romans 4:7 says, "Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered." Psalm 85:2 says, "You forgave the iniquity of your people. You covered all their sin." In hiding from his father what his brothers did, Joseph is trying to avoid committing what's called Lashon hara, which is to say the evil tongue. And some sages translate it to negative speech. Lashon hara, though, literally means evil speech. And yes, that includes lies, but lies are more often spoken of as their own special class of sin. The most common forms of Lashon hara are truth, actually, cruel truths. We find it in gossip. We also find it in cruel words or insults. That, well, I'm just speaking the truth when I tell you you're stupid, or whatever the terrible, mean thing it is that's being said. Lashon hara is at its most vicious and most sinful when it is true. That's when it cuts the deepest.
Hearing.
I'm sorry?
Hearing and Aaron when they speak against
Yes. Yeah.
They did not speak. They did not speak lies.
Yeah.
Moses was married to an Ethiopian woman.
Yeah.
But
they
brought it forward as evil.
Yeah. Now, when people say something truly harsh and then follow it with, well, I'm just speaking the truth, often they have committed Lashon hara. While the truth does need to be spoken, that is very important, and often truth by its very nature will cause pain. That is true. There are still gentle and kind ways to present it. And if we bypass the gentle and kind ways to present the truth and instead favor a cruel way to present truth, we commit Lashon hara. Moreover, we have to consider the intention behind our speech. Is your intent to help, or is it to hurt? Will your speech serve peace and unity, or will it cause strife and division? Will it protect, or will it cause harm? Generally, it is wrong to expose the sins and secrets of others. Now, I will say, though, that there are some exceptions to that rule that we have to be mindful of. Because I have in the past seen people crying, Lashon hara, that's Lashon hara, used to silence witnesses against egregious abuses of power. I've seen it used to sweep things under the rug that should have been brought to light. And therefore, I believe it's important to discuss the exceptions to the rules against speaking about the sins and secrets of others. Saying Lashon hara is only permitted when said for strictly constructive purposes. See, that's what the sages have ruled. You can speak about the sins and secrets of others when it is constructive, but there are more caveats than that. Bear with me. Even then, however, one is required to ensure that what he is saying meets a criterion of 7 conditions. The one saying the Lashon hara, or the negative speech, has either personally witnessed or corroborated that which he is saying with certainty. The mouth of 2 or more reliable witnesses is the bare minimum for making sure that it's true. Next, one must be sure that the offense committed is in fact wrong, and not just has the appearance of being a problem. Like you said with him marrying an Ethiopian woman. That's not wrong. Nothing wrong with that. And before discussing the negative activity, one has to have attempted to highlight the wrongdoing to the person being spoken about and have encouraged him to reconsider and change his behavior. Also, one may not exaggerate that which he is retelling in any way whatsoever. I think that kind of goes without saying, because at that point that's a lie. An exaggeration is a lie. He who relays negative information may only do so with a constructive motive and not based on any hatred toward or thrill from speaking about the subject. There must be no other way in which to achieve whatever constructive purposes saying the Lashon hara will accomplish. So if there's another way to solve it without outing the secret, you keep the secret. Even if all other criteria are fulfilled, one still may not say Lashon hara or negative speech about another if the damage caused to the person discussed will be greater than can be justified by the shortcoming in question. So, if you're going to cause more damage than you're going to fix by speaking of the negative thing done, then keep quiet. Rav Eliezer Melamed, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, notes that the most critical condition is whether it is purposeful and important for the recipient to hear to save them from a potential pitfall. So basically, is it important for the person you're telling this to hear? Will it save them from something? If not, then there's no purpose to tell them. If one can't fulfill all 7 conditions, it may still be permitted as long as it's for that purpose, to prevent harm being done. One example of this that I've heard is that if a woman intends to marry a man, but her friend knows for a fact that this man abused his past girlfriends or his ex-wife, and that man has not been forthcoming with that information, it is not just permissible, but in fact the friend's duty to warn her friend of the man's abusive tendencies. Another example I've heard is that if your friend is about to enter into a business contract with someone, but you know for a fact that the person they're about to enter into this contract with has a history of cheating their partners, it is your duty to warn them of the danger. However, in these cases, it is important to tell no more than the bare minimum necessary. You don't go on about 1,000 things that are wrong with this person. You just say, hey, I understand this about them. On the listener's part, he or she may only act protectively as a result of the negative information heard. However, one may not accept the information heard as fact and consequently express disdain or animosity toward the subject, but only take precautionary measures as needed. In short, if you're about to marry someone and your friend tells you, hey, that person abused their ex, it is not for you to accept it as fact. You are not to hate this person based purely on what you've been told. You're only to be wary and take steps to protect yourself from the possibility that it is true. There are also situations in which one is permitted to elicit negative speech from someone else, to ask them, hey, what do you know? If one is looking to engage another party for a business partnership or family relationship, for example, and is at a stage where it is appropriate to research another person's background, reputation, or character, he is permitted to inquire and obtain relevant information that might otherwise be considered Lashon hara, like a background check. One does not have license to obtain any negative information unless it is really relevant and necessary to the potential partnership. Still, even when the impetus for the fact-finding is justified, one is very much obligated to disclose his reason for asking negative information. You Let them know why you're asking. That this is not for the sake of sharing gossip. This is not because I want to hear something interesting that just happens to be bad. It's not because I dislike them. It's because you're trying to be cautious. And this is so the person answering does not relate information with the wrong intention and potentially relate too much information. I had also read, if someone sees another Jew sin and he believes that it will be more effective for his father or rabbi to rebuke him than if he were to do so himself, then it is permitted to tell specifically his father or his rabbi, someone in a position of authority over him. In the case of this exception, one must again consider one's own motivations. Delight must not be taken in their chastisement. Neither can one take joy in being proven right by the father or rabbi's chastisement. This must be done purely to correct the sinful behavior for the benefit of the sinner and of others the sinners may otherwise cause harm. Furthermore, given that our example here is Joseph, who did not tell on his brothers for selling him into slavery, I question the validity even of this example. Note that, yes, he didn't tell Jacob when they were together because his brothers had repented, but even when he was viceroy of Egypt and he hadn't seen his brothers again, he still didn't tell Jacob, didn't tell on his brothers. In any event, like I said, they had already repented, they had shown no signs of repeating their past bad behaviors. Unity and peace would not have been served by telling on them to his father. Thus, Joseph kept that secret from his father and kept distance between them to safeguard the secret. We see a similar behavior from Yeshua in the Haft, in the Harashah portion. The scripture says that as he sat down to supper, he knew who would betray him. He didn't tell anyone who. You might say, well, he wanted Judas to fulfill his part so that Yeshua would in fact be crucified as he was destined. If he had said anything, the disciples would have stopped Judas. But even after Judas leaves, and he's long gone, Yeshua doesn't tell his disciples who the traitor is. They don't find out until Judas comes and kisses them on the cheek. And even then, we're not entirely sure if they put two and two together. Like Joseph, he avoids spreading strife by withholding the sins of a man named Judah. Judah and Judas are the same name, just one's a more Greek version. Yeah, Greekified, Hellenized, I think is the term, but Greekified, I think, is more fun. Had Judas not decided to betray him with a kiss, they probably would have never known who the traitor was. Now back to the Torah portion. Upon hearing his father is ill and dying, Joseph hurries to his side, and he brings Manasseh and Ephraim, his sons. Jacob reiterates the blessing God promised him, that his descendants would be fruitful in the land, and the land would always belong to his offspring. Jacob then claims Ephraim and Manasseh as his own sons for the purpose of inheritance. And this is why when the tribes of Israel are listed, there's usually no tribe of Joseph. There's instead a tribe of Ephraim or a tribe of Manasseh, because they stand in for their father Joseph. The lone exception is Revelation, and we'll get to that, just not yet. When Jacob goes to bless the boys, his right hand goes on Ephraim's head, and his left hand goes on Manasseh's head. And Joseph, knows that his father's eyes are failing him; he's older, so he tries to switch them, because Ephraim is the younger son, and the right hand is supposed to confer the blessing on the older child, while the left hand confers the blessing on the younger child. So, Joseph's like, no, Dad, you got him mixed up here. Jacob tells him, I know what I'm doing. And then crosses his arms, go ahead and bless the right ones. Because the older shall serve the younger. At Genesis 48:19, Jacob says that Ephraim shall become a multitude of nations. So I looked into the Hebrew there and found something very interesting. See, the Hebrew words for multitude of nations are melo hagoyim. The Hebrew word melo can mean multitude. It can also mean that which fills, or the fullness. Some of you may already be ahead of me. Don't give it away yet. The word for nations in this case, hagoyim, translates to the Gentiles. So another way to translate this is Ephraim shall become the fullness of the Gentiles. Does anyone else get chills hearing that? I certainly did when the Lord revealed it to me. Romans 11:25 explains why Israel has rejected its Messiah. It says, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion. That blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in." Irony of ironies, Jacob, also known as Israel, gives this prophecy while partly blind. As it says in Genesis 48:10, "Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see." This passage in Genesis, I believe, is the key to understanding Romans 11:25 and the talk of the fullness of the Gentiles. Now, while I have read that the fullness of the Gentiles, some people have said, well, it's like that passage where it talks about the fullness of the sins of the Amorites, waiting for the fullness of the sins of the Amorites before God will pass judgment on them. That's possible. I really hope not, because that would mean that, God's waiting basically for the Christian church to fail, and then he's going to lift the blindness over Israel. I personally like the idea that it is talking about Ephraim as the fullness of the Gentiles that needs to come in. And understand why that makes sense and why that's more comforting. Let's talk about historically what happened to Ephraim. Ephraim was one of the tribes of Israel that was scattered and didn't return. Hosea 6:10 says, "In the house of Israel I have seen a horrible thing. Ephraim's whoredom is there. Israel is defiled." And note that in Hosea, when he speaks of whoredom and adultery, it's symbolic of idolatry, chasing after other gods. Hosea 9:13 says, "Ephraim, as I have seen, was like a young palm planted in a meadow. But Ephraim must lead his children out to slaughter." Jeremiah 31:18 says, "I have heard Ephraim grieving. You have disciplined me, and I was disciplined like an untrained calf. Bring me back that I may be restored, for you are the Lord my God." 2 Chronicles 31:1 speaks of the idols in the land of Ephraim and Manasseh and how they are to be destroyed. Isaiah 17:3 says, "The fortress will disappear from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria will be like the glory of the children of Israel, declares the Lord of hosts." All these verses speak of how Ephraim went astray. Ephraim came to be seen as a tribe of traitors. Funny enough, in John 11:54, when Yeshua could no longer walk safely among his own people, it says he went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim. And there he stayed with the disciples. So if he's safe from the Jews there, then the people of Ephraim are considered Goyim by this point. Gentiles, not Jews. So the tribe of Ephraim is a lost tribe of Israel. We don't know how far they might have spread. They were scattered into the nations. And years ago, someone tried to tell me that Yeshua didn't come for the Gentiles at all. He pointed to Matthew 15:24, which said, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." I would argue, though, that the Gentiles are the lost sheep of Israel. How could that be? Well, because Ephraim is the fullness of Hagoyim, the fullness of the Gentiles. Last week's Haftarah portion came from Ezekiel chapter 37, and from that portion we read the following. "Again the word of the Lord came to me, saying, As for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself, and write on it, for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions. Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Then join them one to another for yourself into one stick, and they will become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, Will you not show us what you mean by these? Say to them, Thus says the Lord God, Surely I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions, and I will join them with it, with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they will be one in my hand. And the sticks on which you write will be in your hand before their eyes. Then say to them, Thus says the Lord God, Surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and I will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land, and I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be over them. They shall no longer be two nations, nor shall they be divided into two kingdoms again. They shall not defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will deliver them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and will cleanse them. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their God. David my servant shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They also shall walk in my judgments, and observe my statutes, and do them. Then they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Jacob my servant, where your fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell there, they, their children, and their children's children, forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in their midst. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. The nations also will know that I, the Lord, sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. Judah and Ephraim are to become one in this prophecy. Jews and Goyim are to become one. Some have pointed out that in Revelation chapter 7, when it lists the tribe of Israel that are going to be sealed, Ephraim does not make the list. However, I think Ezekiel shows us that Ephraim actually is on the list, because Judah is the first tribe in that list. And Ezekiel's prophecy states that Ephraim and Judah will become one. Messianics here in this synagogue, you are the fulfillment of that prophecy. Let's have a show of hands. How many of you have Jewish heritage? Okay, so we're looking at about 40%. And yet, you're all one congregation here. You are the fulfillment of that prophecy of Ephraim and Judah becoming one. Either you're a Jew who has come to faith in Messiah, or you're a Goy who has come to serve the God of Israel. Whether you are of the tribe of Judah or Ephraim, you are part of this prophecy. And some may ask, well, how can you possibly know that we're descended from Ephraim? I mean, sure, he was scattered quite a bit, and just with how long ago it was, there's a good chance that a fair number of you who are not of Jewish descent are actually descended from Ephraim by blood. But I tell you, bloodlines are not the thing that matters here. In Matthew 3:9, Yeshua says, "And do not think to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I say to you that God is able to raise up children of Abraham from these stones." If rocks can become children of Abraham, so can you. Romans 4:11 says, "And Avram received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all those who believe, though they are uncircumcised, that righteousness might be imputed to them also." This prophecy and its meaning gets to the very heart of why we call this synagogue the olive tree. In Romans chapter 11, when speaking of the relationship between Jews who do not believe in Yeshua and Gentiles who do, Paul said, "For if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, who are natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree?" Natural branches being the children of Israel. To clarify, the word translated to broken off is ekla'al. Again, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't take Greek lessons. Something like that. Ekla'al. Something like that. Anyway, in Greek medical texts, it refers to a move in wrestling where one dislocates an opponent's toe. You don't break off or rip off your opponent's toe in a wrestling match. pretty sure you're not allowed to wrestle anymore if you do something like that.
But you can buy ears in boxing.
But ears in boxing, yeah. Only if you're Mike Tyson. But he was supposed to be wearing a mouth guard, so. Anyway, this was simply to dislocate. So the branches that represent the children of Israel are not broken off and cast away, because, well, have you ever tried to break a branch off of a living, thriving tree? It's pretty hard. You pull and you can't quite get it, and maybe at most you'll like strip some of the bark with it, and maybe eventually you'll manage to peel it off of there. But on a living, thriving tree, without an axe or something like that, you really can't break off branches. Break branches really easily off a dead tree.
Oh, yeah.
I would not propose that our Messiah is a dead tree. Our Messiah is a living tree. The branches are not so easily snapped off. The Jewish people have not been broken off from their own olive tree. They have merely been moved aside to allow us to be grafted in. This is the heart of this congregation. That all of us, whether from the nations or from Israel, would be grafted into his olive tree to be as one. And we are not to boast in this identity. Being part of his olive tree is not to make us haughty or proud. As Proverbs 21:4 says, a haughty look, a proud heart, and the plowing of the wicked are sin. We are not to assume that by our being grafted in, that our position is higher or greater than others. Let us remember the example that our Messiah set when he ate the Passover dinner with his disciples. Luke 22:24 says, now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. So while they're all arguing over their pride and who's the best, who's the disciple that he loves the most, who's following him the best, and while they're all trying to exalt themselves, Yeshua takes the opportunity to show them what true greatness really is. In John chapter 13, he rises from the table and washes his disciples' feet. The epitome of humility. None of them had thought to wash one another's feet. In John 13:6-8, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Yeshua answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. And Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. And Yeshua answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. There's another part to this, that humility is not just servitude. It's also the willingness to accept the service of others. Moreover, it is the willingness to admit that we need Yeshua to wash us clean. And moreover, to admit that we need help sometimes. Yeshua here warns against false humility. Years ago, someone I knew expressed distress with the Easter holiday. It was not for the same reason that we as Messianic Jews would have a problem with the Easter holiday. Rather, he took issue with the idea of someone innocent and good dying for his sins. He said, the right attitude upon hearing that should be, no, don't kill him. Take me. I'm the guilty one. Now, this may seem like humility. It may even seem like trying to take responsibility for one's own actions, but it's assuming that the full consequences of sin are anything that you can endure. And that's hubris. I can almost imagine that Peter had just finished saying that he was awesome, that he had been by Yeshua's side, that he'd been looking out for him, and he should be considered the greatest. And Yeshua stoops to serve him. Peter trying to backtrack, saying, well, I didn't mean that I was better than you, Master. And Yeshua reassures him that that's not what this is about. As it says in John 13:12-17, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Yeshua shows us here that we need to serve one another. Not as much, there's not as much need these days to actually wash someone else's feet. But there are still many ways that we can serve. And we also need to be ready to receive service. I think we can all grasp how we need a Savior to wash us from our sins, but Yeshua didn't just come to show us the way to reconcile with God. He came to show us the way to reconcile with each other, too. And in so doing, we reconcile with God. Thus, we need to be ready to accept others' acts of service. Refusing to let someone help you is not humility. It's saying, I don't need help, which is pride. Refusing a gift is not kindness. It denies the other person the joy of giving. Acts 20:35 says, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Luke 6:31 says, and just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. Do you want the blessings that come from giving to others? Do you want the joy of having given someone something they wanted or that they needed or that otherwise makes them happy? Then let us not deny others the blessing that comes from giving. Let not pride stand in the way of good deeds and bonds between brethren. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Let us not deny each other the opportunity to fulfill the law of Christ. Returning once again to the Torah portion, let us look at the blessings that Jacob pronounces on his sons. Some of them admittedly are a little bit weird. In Genesis 49:1, it says, then Jacob called his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. In Hebrew, the phrase days to come is bacharit hayomim, which more accurately translates to the last days or the end of days. He's giving them end times prophecies. Prophecies, however, are a bit odd. To Reuben, he says, they will name a sandwich after you. No, he says, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, unstable as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed and you defiled it. You went up to my couch. And this is referring to Reuben having slept with one of Jacob's wives. He continues, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. He talks about Issachar finding a place to rest, and compares him to a donkey. Thanks, Dad. Zebulun dwells at the shore of the sea. Dan shall judge his people and be a viper by the path. Gad will fight with raiders and eventually will overcome them. Asher will bake pastries.
Royal dainties.
Royal dainties, according to some translations. That one I would argue is, though, a pretty strong blessing because the place where cookies come from, historically, it's when you had an excess of dough. You had more dough than you needed to make bread, so you would devote some of it to making sweets, making cookies. So he's saying, you'll be abundant. That actually is a blessing. Naphtali, he says, is like a doe let loose and will have beautiful fawns, which is very strange that he compares his son to a female deer, but I don't know, maybe there's something there if I dig a little deeper sometime. Joseph will be... Sorry?
Maybe a drop of golden sun.
Drop of golden sun. That's good, yeah. Joseph will be fruitful and remain safe from his attackers. And Benjamin, he compares to a ravenous wolf. Some sages have suggested that Jacob wanted to tell his son about the end times, that he wanted to give them prophecies, but God stopped him. So instead he said blessings over them.
Or something.
Or something, yes. And there are all sorts of explanations they offer. Things like the Ruach HaKodesh left him while he was in his son's presence. God stopped up his mouth when he tried to speak of the end times. times. But personally, I think that these are, in fact, end times prophecies. It's just like in Revelation and other prophet portions, they're a little difficult to figure out. They're symbolic and figurative. And I think the key is in what he tells to the one I left out when I did that list. You might have noticed it. Judah. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Rabbis and sages have long debated the meaning of the name or the word Shiloh. Some Bibles translate it merely as tribute, until tribute comes to him. The name may translate to he whose it is. So it could read, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he whose it is comes to him. This suggests that the one who wields true authority will eventually come to take the scepter from Judah. However, it should be understood that the word translated as until does not mean and then it will cease. It's over now. The word is ad and can be translated to while or as far as, and it's really a concept that in some ways doesn't exist in English because the idea is that it continues on even after that point. So the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, while he whose it is comes to him. What we're looking at is a prophecy of the one who comes of Judah's line who wields a true authority. We see some imagery about him, such as binding his foal to the vine, who identified himself as the vine. We say it every week when we're blessing the wine. Yeshua is the true vine. And his donkey's colt to the choice vine, who came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Again, Yeshua. He is the one to whom all authority belongs. Revelation 5:5 says, Then one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. This identifies Yeshua as the Lion of Judah to come at the end of days and conquer. In Revelation 2:27, it is said that he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron. The significance of the rod being made of iron calls to mind an image of a rod being unbreakable. And while iron is not truly unbreakable, for a long, long time in human history, it was the strongest metal we had. Thus, it is often associated with the idea of being unbreakable. So the prophecy given about Judah's line was most certainly an end times prophecy, as it speaks about a man whose authority can never be broken. But this begs an interesting question. Why was Judah worthy to be the ancestor of the Messiah? Some sages say it's because he kept his hands clean with regard to Joseph. Because he was the one who suggested selling Joseph into slavery rather than killing him. I personally find this kind of dubious, not only because, selling him into slavery is so much better than killing him, sure, but also because Reuben was the one who convinced his brothers not to kill Joseph. Reuben was the one who said, throw him into a pit, because he intended to come back later and rescue him and return to his father. So Judah's hands were not as clean as Reuben's. Sages have pointed out that what Jacob says about Reuben, that he defiled his father's bed by sleeping with one of Leah's handmaidens, who was also the mother to some of Reuben's brothers, that's what disqualifies him. However, if sexual sin disqualifies one from being an ancestor to the Messiah, Judah is similarly disqualified because of his dalliances with Tamar. A simple answer would be that it's not about who's worthy. In truth, no one is worthy of God's gift of his only begotten Son, the Messiah. Even so, I feel there has to be a reason why God would pick Judah, and his line in particular, out of all of them. Why not Joseph's line? After all, hasn't Joseph already shown himself to have the spirit of Messiah? Hasn't he earned the right to be the Messiah's ancestor? Well, the answer to that, I think, is twofold. First, and more obvious, is the matter we talked about before. The fact that the tribe of Ephraim turned to idol worship and then was scattered among the nations. You can't have your Messiah being raised among idol worshippers who have been scattered among the nations. No, he needs to be in the land raised by people who are still loyal to the God of Israel. The second answer is less obvious, but I think it's important. Consider Yeshua's parable in Luke 15, 6-7. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. And I say to you, that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 persons who need no repentance." While I do not believe that Joseph was a truly sinless person, I think he did make mistakes. Nonetheless, as I read through his story, I had a hard time finding anything he did wrong. Maybe you could say he was too mean to his brothers when he was reunited with them. Maybe you could say him giving his father a bad report on them when he was a boy wasn't cool. Snitches get stitches. Tattletaling isn't always great. And maybe you could say that him framing Benjamin and being dishonest, sure, that was sinful. But even that seemed to be for the sake of preserving life. Every one of those, for obedience, for preserving life. It was all in service to trying to be good. It was not for selfish reasons. I honestly don't think that I can find any real fault with Joseph as I read through this story. And honestly, I think that's part of why Judah was chosen over him. See, when I was a teenager, I went to a church youth group and I hung out with church-going people, and I stayed away from a lot of the typical vices that teenagers, oftentimes fall victim to. The wild parties and inappropriate relationships and things like that. Yeah. My greatest sin, I would argue, was the very harsh judgment and condemnation I passed upon teenagers and even some adults who engaged in such things. I walked around feeling like I was morally superior to most of my schoolmates. I was not unlike the Pharisee in Yeshua's parable at Luke 18:11, who stood by himself and prayed this prayer: "I thank you, God, that I am not like other people, cheaters, sinners, adulterers, and I'm certainly not like that tax collector." That was me as a teenager. I did not brag aloud, but that was certainly in my heart and in my thoughts all the time. I should have been more wary of what Yeshua says in Luke 18:14, "For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." The Lord certainly humbled me in the days that followed high school, for you see, the reason I hadn't engaged in the sinful behaviors of others was because I had never truly been tempted with them. And in my 20s, I faced true temptation and sinned in ways that the teenage me never would have thought I would have. The teenage me would have condemned me straight to the pits. And he would have been wrong too. Having even long been the target of bullies in my youth, I found myself, and eventually caught myself, bullying others. Not straight up beating people up and taking their lunch money. You go to jail for that as an adult. But a lot of mocking of shortcomings and jokes at other people's expense. Exposing secrets that didn't need to be exposed for the sake of tearing them down. I became a bully in my 20s. I have since repented of those ways, though many of them often do threaten to sneak back. Just hear the inklings, do this again. That guy deserves to be made fun of. The temptations are not gone, but I'm better able to recognize the true harm they cause. And more importantly, I learned something from my decades of sinking sinfulness. Sorry, not decades, decade. I'm not even really all that old. I haven't been around more than 3 decades. I learned not to condemn others for giving into those temptations. I learned that rather than writing people off as adulterers or drunkards or sinners, Gentleness and kindness are far more likely to lead them back to the light. And that, I believe, is why Judah was chosen to be Yeshua's ancestor. Not because he was sinless, but because he was repentant and learned harsh lessons about condemning others. Because he himself was forgiven and therefore was ready to give grace to others. As it says in John 3:17, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." It's often all too easy for people who have so little need for repentance to condemn those who do. Yeshua was the lone exception to that, a truly miraculous individual who both did no wrong and had grace for sinners. And even he spent 40 days in the wilderness being continuously tempted while he was weak, while he was physically weak but spiritually strong. Therefore, if he, being our master, can show grace and forgiveness to others for their sins, and a servant is not greater than his master, we must therefore forgive others. After all, what others mean for evil against us, God means for good. Through their actions, God put us exactly where we need to be in life. It is only through forgiveness and grace that we will be able to unite as one, to fulfill the vision of the prophet Ezekiel and join together the branches of Ephraim and Judah. We cannot accomplish unity between peoples until we have reached unity between ourselves and within ourselves. To help us with this goal, let's continually pray for the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, to fill us, guide us, and help us every day to be more like our Messiah. Take heart, for through your faith in the Messiah and the God of the Torah, biblical prophecy is being fulfilled.